According to UN Habitat, 880 million people live in urban slums, territories characterized by inferior access to public services, overcrowded and precarious housing, and insecure tenancy. Although the share of the global population living in urban slums has declined in recent decades from about half of the population of the urban global south in 1990 to about a third today, the absolute number continues to grow. And this tendency can be explained at least in part by the failure of public land use regulation and housing policies. But it also can be viewed as an aspect of economic progress to the extent that it is associated with the migration of usually poorer rural households seeking better jobs in urban centers. Informal neighborhoods also reflect the initiative of people who in need of housing, and in many cases, their collective action. Just as informal employment often refers to the jobs created by people living in situations of poverty, informal settlements are neighborhoods created by people with low incomes and lack of access to credit who are forced to create their own housing on unoccupied lands. The problem is that territorial segregation, insecurity, environmental hazards, and other social problems contribute to the social exclusion of the residents of informal settlements. And the experience shows that different types of government policies have very different effects on achieving the social inclusion. Research has shown, for example, in the case of Chile, that public housing projects that focus on the relocation of the population of informal settlements to public housing projects can lead to the creation of urban ghettos that experience many of the same problems as informal settlements. This panel session aims to focus on the processes of urbanization and integration of informal settlements into the city. Some of the questions the panelists will discuss are: what types of neighborhood upgrading programs have been most and least effective? How have informal neighborhood improvement programs changed over time? And how have the principles on which they are based changed? And what are the implications of states' investment in improving informal neighborhoods for multidimensional inequality in the different territorial scales, namely the neighborhood, the city, and the nation? Obviously, many different criteria can be used to evaluate the effectiveness of integration programs. One could evaluate the effect on the size of the population living in informal settlements, or on property values, or in access to public services. But in the context of this conference, we want to look at what are the effects on capabilities and on agency of the population of informal settlements. So I would like to present our three panelists. All of them work for international organizations that support government programs to integrate informal settlements around the world. First, Nora Libertun de Duren is an urban development and housing expert at the Inter-American Development Bank, where she leads research activities on urban issues. She holds a degree in architecture from the University of Buenos Aires, a master's in urban design from Harvard University, and a PhD in urban planning from MIT. She has broad experience both as a policymaker and in academia. Before joining the IDB, she served as Director of Planning at New York City's Department of Parks and Recreation, where she led a citywide strategy for creating sustainable and accessible public spaces. She has lectured on the topics of housing, urban public space, urban growth, and sustainable development, and has been published numerous papers in peer-reviewed journals. Carole Megevand works as program leader for sustainable development for the World Bank in the Southern Cone region, where her responsibilities span various sectors, including infrastructure, urban, agriculture, climate change, and social. She holds master's degrees both in agricultural economics and environmental and natural resource economics, and she has more than 20 years of professional experience and has managed various complex natural resource operations with a focus on intersectoral dimensions and governance issues. Finally, Pablo López is Chief Executive Officer at the Vice Presidency of Social Development of CAF-Latin American Development Bank. He has a master's in urban planning from the University of London and a master's in public administration and a degree in civil engineering from the National University of Córdoba, Argentina. He has extensive experience working on urban and regional projects in England, Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, and Bolivia, and specializes in the formulation and management of social infrastructure projects with emphasis on urban development. So first we will hear from Nora Libertun.
Thank you, Anne. I also would like to thank the conference organizers for choosing urban as the topic for this year and allowing us to rethink the issue of capabilities in a territorial environment. So now I will present something. I don't know if my presentation is there. Just to advance what I will be presenting, the aim of my presentation is to provide a framework on the issue of informal settlements and where are our thoughts at this moment. So basically what I'll do is 3 by 3 by 3, and hopefully I will explain 3 myths, 3 things that I consider to be myths in terms of informal settlements, 3 issues that are persistent and are problems that we care about and we don't know yet how to solve them, and 3 proposals that I think will help us get to a better future. So just to give a sense of something that Anne already mentioned, there has been an improvement in terms of percentage of people living in informal settlements. Our region, Latin America and the Caribbean, has seen a reduction of those numbers, which is remarkable, and we should celebrate that. But having said that, the numbers are huge because, as you know, the trend of urbanizing people continue to grow, 80% of the people, so it means that the number of people living in informal settlements is 150 million, and that's a lot. And that implies that there are some solutions that we cannot apply at this scale. And that's something to think about when we think about informal settlements. How can we do something that is scalable, that it can reach all these people? Now, let's start with the myths, things that have informed the thinking on these topics and I think are not helping us anymore. So the myth of the rural-urban migration and the myth of the evolution and the idea that informal settlements are caused by rural migrants going to the cities, and that is just a stage, that eventually, after the family settles, they will be engaged in the formal economy and they will move out of the informality. And this photo is from the 60s and it does represent that reality, but that's not explaining what's happening now. And these are the numbers of the urbanization of the region. Latin America has been urbanized for, since the 60s. Like how long can we wait for this to take care of itself? It's clear that some people are being settled in informal settlements and is not coming out of that state just because they live in a city. We have, there is a very famous book by Janice Perlman studying favelas, and it shows that you see families, 3 generations, 4 generations still living in the same favela. The other myth is that there is a very close correlation between poverty and informal settlements. Of course poverty is there. Of course many of the people who are living in informal settlements are there because they cannot afford to live in the formal city, but that's not explaining the numbers we have now. And there has been a rise in terms of income, but still there is a persistent number of people who stays in an informal settlement, which highlights that there are other barriers beyond income to move from those places. Either there are other incentives, for staying there, or other barriers for moving to the rest of the city. And the last one, which is perhaps the the more difficult to grasp at this moment, is that informal settlements are not related to the lack of housing. There has been many, many programs providing affordable housing for low-income people, and that has not worked well. And you see that this is in Mexico, and we have done many papers and studying what have happened and how many people abandon this houses unit, and that's a real problem. And the issue is, it's urban housing. People do not go to informal settlements because they need a house. They need the location. And in as much as the housing policies do not reflect the need for being in the city, informality will continue. It's not the house, it's the location, it's the access to what the city offers, or at least promises to offer. So, in terms of the issues that are persisting and are making harder to deal with informality at the scale that we have to deal with. So, number one is violence and crime, and that's not happening only in informal settlements, but clearly in those areas, the levels of crime are higher. And that's an issue because people who live in those areas are both suffering higher levels and having less resources to deal with those situations. And that's a very serious issue. And there has been a problem in terms of how the state can reach those populations. We are completing a study on Favela Barrio, which is a very famous program in Rio de Janeiro. And what we are doing is going back to what had happened to the favelas that were urbanized 10 years ago. And the number one thing we see is that no matter what has been done in terms of infrastructure, if there is violence there, those favelas do not improve. There is destroyment of infrastructure, there is no increase in the household income. So that's something that is undermining all our efforts. And of course, it's not a problem at the scale of the informal settlement. It goes beyond that, but it happens in that territory more often, so we need a specific way to deal with that. The number two is that cities in general are having systematic problem with infrastructure. By systematic, I mean it's not just that there is lack of certain services in these areas. The whole city is having these issues. You know, when you talk about traffic, that's systemic. That's how the city works or does not work. When you talk about floods, that's systemic. You know, it's how the city can manage its environment or can coexist with its environment. But again, this situation is much more dramatic when we go to informal settlements. And the whole issue of more extreme weather events, floods, you know, drought, whatever, you name it, is going to be felt here first. And again, these people does not have enough resources to cope with that. So that's a very serious problem. And again, a systemic issue. Local governments are underfunded, and the governance and the resources and the institutional side is very, very weak, and that's a problem. And it's a problem in as much as the cost of providing services to these areas is really going higher, and it's very expensive to go back and to provide the services to these places. And here you just see a correlation between density and the cost of services per capita, and it's becoming that cities are either too congested in some areas, which is what's happening in informal settlements, or too sprawled in the formal areas. And it's very hard to find that equilibrium, and it's making very, very hard for local governments who are underfunded to cope with that situation. And now in terms of proposals, and again, these are not things that are going to be a magic bullet, are going to solve it, but I think should be considered when we are trying to look into a better future. So you have a problem, you need to do two things. You need to try to solve it, and you need to prevent it from becoming bigger. So the first one is trying to solve what we have right now. So we need to find ways to integrate these people who are living there into the city. There's no other way around it. You cannot, you know, assume that a fourth of the population are going to stay isolated forever. So one of the key things is public space. And I think that there's one very interesting case, very famous, by the way, in Medellin, Colombia, in which most of the work is done in the public spaces. And also in the architecture that represent those public institutions like schools, libraries, places where people can connect to each other. And that's very important in terms of dealing with the issues of violence, but as well in terms of making people be part of a community that works, and roads. And that's what you are seeing in that photo, and that's what I like, you know, that you see connections there. Number two, and this is about prevention, we need to start planning long-term at different scales. It has to do with the nation, it has to do with the state, it has to do with the city, it has to do with the neighborhood, and all that planning, in order to be meaningful, need to have stakeholders, need to be something that people care about. And that's a very difficult exercise, it's a very laborious exercise, but there is no way around it. We have to do it. There is no way that people would engage with their spaces if they have not been part of it. And the last one, it's urban housing. It's affordable urban housing. It's not just about housing policies that provide places to live somewhere. It has to be where people care to be. And that's very difficult, but that's what we need to do. We cannot keep on thinking about informal settlements without thinking about formal housing in cities. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you and with my colleagues from the CAF and IDB, talking about this topic that is hugely important for us. So I will be talking about inclusive city and explain a little what the World Bank is doing about that. And you will hear a lot of commonalities with what you've just heard from Nora. But I will take a global overview, bringing a worldwide view on what we are doing and what we are seeing as the main challenges. So I guess, yeah. So first of all, and that's what Anne was mentioning in her introduction, is about the fact that the portion of the urban people living in informal settlements have made some progress over the last few decades. So you can see that in terms of the portion of urban population, you've seen a huge decrease in most of the developing countries. One of the main progress can be seen in the Asia region, that went from more than 70% to now about 50%. But the trend is the same. The downward trend is the same for all the major developing regions. Latin America, Africa, and Asia, and yes, MENA. But the most important is to see how many people are living there. Maybe the proportion has reduced, but as you know, the urbanization trend tends to bring more and more people in the city. And what we see is a reverse trend in terms of the absolute numbers of people living in the slum. So you see a kind of a growth in the number in Asia, but that seems to reach somehow a plateau. But the trend in the Africa region is much more worrying. You can see that there is a big jump in the portion of the people living in slums in the African cities. In absolute numbers, that means that there is about just below 1 billion people living in slums. That means that those people are deprived from housing, proper housing, basic services. They're usually more vulnerable, and they tend to live in very, very poor conditions. So what does the bank do about that? As you can see, urban development program is very large at the World Bank. We work in more than 120 countries, and this is something that is expanding. And why is it expanding? Because it's very clear that the cities are at the core of the mandate that we have as an institution, meaning reducing poverty and boosting shared prosperity. Cities are engine of economic growth, and they can become engine also for poverty reduction and shared prosperity. But what does it mean exactly? And I wanted to show you the type of interventions we've had over the past decades, because it's quite substantially changed, and I would like to tell you a little bit the rationale behind that. So today you can see that we have about $1 billion invested in those countries each year, but it has hugely increased over the past 4 decades. So coming to the idea that this is an area that we are more and more involved in because there is more and more demand from our clients. In the 70s, the large part of our portfolio was really on slum upgrading and site and services type of operations. And in the 80s and 90s, you could see that the bottom part in the blue, which is on the slum upgrading, really kind of disappeared from the portfolio, and same as well on the 90s on the services, sites and services. Why at the same time there was a boom in housing financing and housing policy. So we had shifted a little bit the portfolio outside of the slum upgrading and the site and services type of activities, but more and more on the housing financing and the housing policies. And why was that? At that time, it was considered that maybe the most important was to work on prevention and to make sure that the creation of new slums would be avoided. And rather than focusing on the upgrading of the existing slums, the most important, and given the massive trend in urbanization, it was to really prevent creation of new slums. And you can see that now we've come back to a much more balanced portfolio. So we have all these different interventions, almost all of them in an equal weight in the portfolio, where slum upgrading is very back on the front of our activities. And this is mostly driven by the demand in Africa and also in Asia, where the need in slum upgrading is really high. We still very much are involved in policy, housing policy and housing financing, but in a much more balanced way. So I would like to share with you what are the main principles that are driving today the way we work in urban development to make cities more inclusive. So we've come up with the approach that in order to be inclusive, there are 3 dimensions. First, we need to think the inclusion in terms of spatial inclusion, to make really those informal settlements part of the city, to really weave them in the fabric of the city, so they really become part of the city. And it has a lot to do with the access to housing, access to the city itself, access to land, access to public services. But there are other dimensions that are as important and that may have been overlooked in the way that we were designing previously our portfolio. First one is on social inclusion. And what we mean by social inclusion is to really ensure that those people living in the slums will have the rights, equal rights to housing, rights to land, right to voice as well in the public arena, and also participation. And the third one is about economic inclusion, and really to generate these opportunities for all these people, opportunities to really take advantage of the prosperity and the agglomeration that cities can bring, and also to benefit from this agglomeration. But I will come more details on those examples. And so first on the spatial housing, I won't spend too much time because it's very much the traditional approach, really focusing on infrastructure and trying to make a better access to housing. So some of you, I understand, have had the chance to visit the Barrio 31 earlier this week, and those are pictures from this place. So together with IDB, we're involved in the upgrading of this barrio, which is very symbolic because that's a settlement that is in the middle of one of the most known area in the city. So what we're are doing is that we are upgrading on-site the different infrastructure, both the structure of the housing as well as the interior of the housing. We are trying as much as we can to really have this improvement of the infrastructure in situ, to keep the people where they are, because there is a commitment to these areas, and people usually tend not to move. But there are some cases, and there is one in this Barrio 31, where the conditions are just too risky, and we don't want those people to remain under these conditions. So we also have some part of resettlement, and we are building some new housing opportunities for these people and to ensure a proper resettlement of these people. Spatial inclusion is about access to basic services and infrastructure, and I won't spend too much time on that. It's about access to water, access to waste management, to drainage, and also to public services, exactly what Nora was saying. We are putting more and more emphasis on creating those areas where people can come together and when the social fabric can be strengthened. But the lesson that we learned is that it's important not to apply a one-size-fits-all. It's important to make sure that those solutions for infrastructure will be tailored to the needs. And this brings me to the next slide on the social inclusion and how we make sure that those people are part of the project and how we recognize their rights and participation to be active participants in the process. So on the social inclusion, we had a flagship on social inclusion matters that was disclosed in 2013, and it really brought up a framework on how we make the growth more inclusive and how we make sure that we take into account all the different dimensions of inclusion, social inclusion. And in that sense, the motto that get out of this flagship was to make sure that we recognize and we secure collective and individual rights to improve their participation in the society, so they are really part of the society. And there are many different rights. So I mentioned the rights to land, the right to housing, the right to public services, but there is a new area that we are getting more and more involved in our project, and this is the right to security, and it's completely linked to what Nora was mentioning. The issue of crime and violence that is plaguing many, many different cities around the world in developing countries, but also in developed countries, on really getting to the prosperity that they could generate. So I would like just to present an example of one of the projects that we had in Jamaica. Jamaica is suffering hugely of crime and violence, and there was even a study that estimated that about 4% of GDP was lost every year because of crime and violence, and just because of loss of productivity of the people living in these areas. So this is a huge problem, and without tackling this problem, we can't really make sure that the cities are becoming the engine of growth and shared prosperity that we would like to see. So what do we do about that? I would say we do the very traditional thing. We create a better environment. So we still work on the infrastructure. We make sure that the access to housing, the access to public areas, the access to basic services are covered, and so that people feel better in their environment. But we also try to work on recreating these social bonds within the community. And we have worked a lot on different programs at the family level, program at the community level, program to tackle the issue of violence, domestic violence, or more general violence, and to really try to rebuild these social fabrics that sometimes is missing in these areas. Usually those are not huge components. They do not require a lot of money, but it requires time. You need to build on participation of people, really understand what they want, and to build with them the different programs. So this is an area where we are getting more and more involved. We are learning from all the different projects that we're having on this area, and we can see that there is a huge demand. And participation, I wanted to mention that because we've seen a quite significant difference the way that we engaged with the communities in those kind of projects. Initially, maybe 2 decades ago, we were seeing the communities mostly as beneficiaries and recipients of the project. Now, more and more, and we've seen that it has a huge impact, they are really in the driver's seats, and they are really becoming the main drivers and the main engine of those projects, and they are becoming the implementers of the project. So this is just a picture from a project in Kenya where you have a committee that's set up and that decides on all the different dimensions and aspects of the project, and they are the one defining how the resources will be used, where the priorities should be made, and this is a collective decision, and there are representatives that are decided by the community. So this is something that has really made a shift from the way we were working before and the way we work now. Then on the third dimension of the inclusion is about economic opportunities, and make sure that everybody in an equal manner will be able not only to contribute but also to benefit from the prosperity that the cities usually bring. Cities are just growing not by chance, they're growing because they're seen as a huge opportunity. But not all of the people, of the drillers can really get access to those opportunities. Worldwide, 80% of the economic activities lie in cities because industries and services really build on this agglomeration effect that the cities are bringing. So how do we try to work to ensure a better access to opportunities for the people living in an informal settlement? So first, there is a mismatch between where the people live, these informal settlements, and where the jobs are. The distance can be huge. So just having this physical connectivity and creating, this access is a big step. And we see here, the emblematic metro cable from Medellin in Colombia, where it was absolutely impossible to have any type of access for those communities that were living on very steep mountains, and there was no way, either roads or metro, to get there. So they decided to go for this very innovative solution, which is a metro cable. So they are traveling in air to get to the city and to get to their jobs. But I'll go quick. Another thing is that sometimes the distance is not the only problem. It's about the affordability of the transport sector. When you travel long distance, usually it's much expensive. So we're also working a lot with the cities on how we can make sure that those people who have to travel from far distances can also get some specific tariffs, and we've worked with many different to have this type of integration of fares. Access to credit, so again, this is something that we are embedding more and more in our different projects, and that really offer the opportunity to people through very small credits. Usually it's really microcredits to start a business and to really get an opportunity to develop some activities. Skill building, I will go very fast. It's important for the people, if they want to access to good jobs, to have the good skills. So we're working on skill buildings. But the very one point I wanted to mention is that we just don't need to build the skills for today's worker, but we also need to think about tomorrow's worker and to make sure that those kids living in slums also get access to good education and that they can really build their capital to be competitive in the future work. Just very, very quickly, I know I'm under pressure from Anne, just what become the huge pressure on cities and slum upgrading. So first, urbanization trend is here to stay, and we will still have more and more people coming to the cities. It's estimated worldwide that by 2050, there will be about 2.5 billion more people living in the cities. So we need to see with the local governments, with the state, with the countries, how they can really accommodate those people, and that means strengthening the capacity of the local government. Now we have huge technologies and databases and data technology that can be used to do that. Financing is also very much an issue. How can we find all this financing to make sure that all this needed project will be developed? And there are some innovative ways, land capture value, to maybe tackle this challenge. Migration, I wanted to mention the migration because we have the usual flow of people getting to the cities, but I think there are a few cities that are getting under huge pressure, and we see that unfortunately in very different regions in the world, people leaving because of wars, civil wars, or economic disarray, and those people tend to come to cities. And those are not things that can be planned or that can be projected. That means that there is a huge pressure on infrastructure, demand for public services that come very quick. And we're working together with the UN Refugee Agency to see how we can balance this humanitarian need and also to generate these development trends. And the very last one is on climate change. So Nora was mentioning that those areas are also the same way that the rest of the city are also subject to extreme events such as floods, but they tend to be much more vulnerable and much more exposed to those risks. Exposed in the sense that very often they are in areas that tend to be flooded much more often than the other one, or even more flooded than the other ones, so they suffer more, and they're much more vulnerable in the sense that they are usually not ready to tackle climate events when they come up. So between vulnerability and exposure, they are doubly suffered from this type of from events. So this is really something that needs to be embedded in the planning from the local governments, so that they also plan for these adverse events and they can make sure that they are prepared when they occur. And I will stop there. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting me to this event. It's a pleasure to be here and to share with my colleague from the World Bank and the IDB to discuss this very important topic for the region. I'm going to talk about the integration of informal settlement from the Latin American perspective. I work in a bank that deals with development problem in Latin America. So I want to tell you what are the ideas that we are elaborating in the bank in order to face the challenge that present us, the integration of informal settlement. Let me start with this slide. As you know, Latin America is an urbanized region. More than between 70 and 80% of people live in cities. And the urbanization process is generally good. For example, in economic terms, in cities, firms and residents enjoy agglomeration economies and economics of scale, as well as the effect of networks, which together increase labor productivity and reduce the per capita cost of providing urban services. However, these benefits don't materialize for everyone in the context of high macroeconomic instability. The rapid pace of urbanization that Latin America has undergone has good and had consequences. So I'm not going to go into the details about them, but I'd like to point out that the urbanization process in Latin America was developed with a very low level of productivity, as you see in the figure. Latin America, the GDP per capita in Latin America nowadays is $7,000 with this rate of urbanization, almost 70–80%, and it's equal to the same level of productivity that developed countries exhibited 50 years ago. Well, Fortunately, it doesn't work. But I mean, this figure tried to show the other problem about inequality. I mean, this is another problem in the region, and even when the level of inequality has decreased during the last decades, it still remains very, very high. And comparatively, the chart tried to show that for the same level of income per capita, Latin American countries are about the median level of other countries in the world. Sorry. One of the spatial consequences of this low level of productivity and high inequality and rapid urbanization process within the context of high macroeconomic instability, it was the proliferation of slums, perhaps one of the crowdest demonstration of social exclusion. And as my colleague from the IDB said, it's estimated that more than 150 million people live in slums in Latin America. And we in CAF are trying to understand the dynamic of this phenomenon. We have started mapping with satellite images informal settlement in Latin America. And just to give you an example, I show in this slide an image from Manaus in Brazil, where you can see the evolution of informal settlement along the period of near 20 years. And what you can see is that apart from the fact that the process of creation, the green dots in the figure, and disappearing, the red dots of informal settlement, the process is very dynamic. Many of them remain and consolidate a long time. And this fact shows how difficult it is to solve the problem. It is estimated that in order to close the gap in housing and urban infrastructure deficit, Latin America must invest around 8% of the GDP, and currently the investment is about 1% of the GDP. So we need to multiply for 7 times the current level of investment. So the slums represent a huge challenge for Latin America. So how to avoid new informal settlement and how to avoid the growth of existing ones? How to integrate them into the formal city, and how to move from exclusion to inclusion. In order to approach a solution, I think we need to understand the problem of slums as a result of weak housing markets. People live in a slum due to the fact they cannot find an appropriate home in the formal market because of lack of enough income or inadequate housing in the correct place, as was said previously. But access to affordable housing is not only a problem for the poorest, but for many people in Latin America. In Latin America, access to housing is increasingly difficult, and an average household needs 25 years of his monthly income to buy a home of 50 square meters. Nowadays, a young has less probability of buying a house than his parents 20 years ago, and he can spend almost 50% of his income in renting. And these figures illustrate part of the problem, but show that it's necessary to intervene on the general housing market if you want to provide some structural solution to the increasing problem of unaffordability. So, what are we doing in CAF? First, we think we need to understand better how the housing market works, what its main components are, and how we can effectively intervene on them. We need to promote policies on different parts of the housing market in order to generate more options for people living in informal settlement. Second, given the lack of resources available for investment, we need to ask what kind of intervention we should prioritize, what kind of policy could really make a difference. And our immediate reaction is to prioritize those policies that improve the level of income of families living in informal settlement. And we think that at least policy within this area should be prioritized. The first one is water and sanitation. Water and sanitation is a priority service because of its impact on health and indirectly on school performance and employment. About 8 million people don't receive water through pipes in Latin America. The area is closely related to poor living condition, and it's estimated to cause 21% of children death under 5 years of age in developing countries. And this problem becomes more severe in informal settlement where infections spread more easily. In fact, the improvement in access to drinking water together with better hygienic practices reduce the case of diarrhea and anemia, and the reduction in anemia improves the school performance of children. The other relevant aspect, as my colleague from the World Bank already said, is the acquisition of adequate skills. This is an issue that has been deeply studied by CAF 2 years ago, and the analysis and policy recommendations were captured in the Economic Development Report 2016, Skills for Work and Life. What our report shows is that the skills that we acquire throughout our life cycle are determinants of the type of work and remuneration that we will obtain during our journey in the labor world. And this skill can be classified broadly into cognitive and social and physical skills. And the level of each of them and the combination between them determine the possibilities of employment and income in the future. So the acquisition of these skills are important in two key moments, early childhood and adolescence, and so the creation of cognitive, social, and physical skills among children from the very early age starting point of the life cycle is a key policy. The kind of policy, as was already mentioned in Medellin, for example, with providing high-class kindergarten school in informal settlement, and to improve the skill from a very early age are the type of projects we are willing to support. Another key policy that can improve household income are those addressed to encourage the participation of women in the labor market. Several problems need to be solved around this issue, but perhaps one of the most important is the high unwanted pregnancy rate among young women. In Latin America, only 50% of pregnancy are wanted or planned, and 20% of young women between 15 and 19 years old are already mothers or are pregnant. And in the poorest 20%, this figure is out of 3. And fertility rate depends the educational and deepens the education and labor gap. Teenage pregnant is the main cause of female school dropouts, and having children is associated with lower female participation in the labor market and less labor income even 10 years after children birth. So policy that can help to control this unwanted pregnancy rate or policy that provides childcare centers and the like are policy we think are effective in informal settlement as well. Finally, as was already said, another key policy is the connectivity of the informal settlement to the opportunities that the formal city offers to their citizens. The access to better employment and better quality of education and health services is usually constrained by the lack of adequate mobility between the informal settlement and the formal city. Poor people tend to spend a great deal of time and money in commuting. In Latin America, those who earn the minimum wage spend almost 16% of their income in transportation and spend in commuting almost an additional hour than the richest. So you can see this in the case of Buenos Aires. In the red area are the place where low-income people live, and well, I don't know if you can see correctly on the right side, and there is an evidence of the time and money that poorest spend moving to the main center of employment and consumption in the city. I would like to finish with a question mark about integral regeneration policy in urban settlements. This is a picture of Santana Hill in Guayaquil. We have been providing loans since 15, 20 years now, and the municipality has gotten about 18 loans for the regeneration process, and the process is still going on. This picture is one face of the hill, and the opposite face remains unchanged, still unchanged. And this case, as I'm sure many others in the region, reveals how difficult is the transformation of deprived urban space in a sustainable manner. It demands a lot of resources and time. We need to think more about how it can work better, but above all, we need to think about how can leverage another kind of forces, above all market forces, that can sustain the process a long time. I'm going to finish here. As I said, this is a very, very complex issue, and I hope these ideas could be useful for the discussion we'll have afterward. Many thanks for your attention.
Thank you all for your presentations. I really wanted to leave a lot of time for questions, which we'll have right now, so that we can, questions from the audience. But I'll start with the first question, which has to do with how to prioritize investments. Given a scarcity of resources, it's obviously necessary to prioritize which settlements to, informal settlements to urbanize or to invest in first. And the question is whether, what has the experience been, what has been learned about prioritization, and based on what criteria are these different institutions advising governments in terms of where to invest money first. In Argentina has more than 4,000 informal settlements. There are 55 informal settlements in the city of Buenos Aires. So how is that, what has been learned about where to invest first?
Thank you for the question. I think that the first thing is not the advice that anyone can give, but the decision of the society, hopefully clearly reflected by the priorities of those who implement those decisions on which is the notion of justice and social justice that they want to advance. Because according to that, you will know what to prioritize. I mean, it could be, and different things have been done, like according to how deep is that level of poverty, according to the number of people living there, according to how critical is the situation in terms of climate vulnerability, according to how critical is that territory for the rest of the city. And we have seen different examples. But then there's another criteria, which is more pragmatic, which is according to what can be sustained through time. So those are kind of like categorical choices. Those are not rational decisions. But having made that step, one thing that we learned through the study of Rio de Janeiro and what had happened with Favela Barrio is that the criteria they used there was size. They said, there has to be at least 500 families living in those settlements. What had happened is that whenever there were high levels of crime, there was no sustainability in the project. The issue was that either the works that were completed were destroyed, or the municipality could not access the favelas and actually prevent decay through tear and wear. So I think that those choices are choices that has to do with what the society values. But then once those choices are made, there are some wisdom on how to implement them.
Yeah, thank you. That works? Yes. So I would go along the same line. First, clarifying that the client, we are banks, the clients are eventually the ones that are making the decision on the prioritization. So we work with them towards this prioritization process, but eventually they are the one making the decision on how they want to use the money from the different institutions that we represent. What we're trying to do is that we will never have enough money to do enough projects to cover all the needs. That's a given. So what we are trying to do is also to work with the clients towards the process and identify first the highly priority projects, but not only because they're highly priority, but where they can learn from. And this learning process is really important, and how this can be used then to replicate and to scale up, that's one of the criteria. In addition, when we make a prioritization for a project, we want also to build a vision for the long term, the medium and the long term, and that's why I wanted to highlight in the presentation the long-term planning and how to anticipate the future needs. And this is something that is more on the soft side, but is also very important for the client to be able to build this capacity. And even if we are financing just one piece, we know that in the future, some others will be coming, but we need to build that in a comprehensive and in an organized and structured way. Then at the level of the project, again, we won't be able to cover all the needs. And this is where the shift to involve more the communities in a structured way as well, and to have a full participation and having them becoming implementers and not only recipients, that makes the huge change, because they are the one making the decision and they become the stewards of the results. They're becoming the steward of the infrastructures that are built, steward of the basic services that are delivered, and it ensures much more sustainability. So in a nutshell, there won't be enough money on our side to cover all the needs. We need to walk through the process of prioritization with the client. And one other thing is also to help them identify some other sources of mechanism of financing that could complement the very limited resources on the public side, on the international bank side. And so there are new ways of land value capture, for example, that are there. A lot of discussions at the local government level on how they can leverage this potential to attract some more financing. It's not the bullet solution, but that could help, scale up a little bit the financing that is available.
Up to questions from the audience.
Hi. First of all, I would like to thank you. I found your expositions very interesting. And my question is for the three speakers, but particularly to Carole. You all highlight the importance of social inclusion and participation of the stakeholders, in this case, the neighbors, in the urbanization process. And we also talk about the case of the Villa 31 settlement here in Buenos Aires. And right now, I found there are some problem maybe with the planning and implementation. Some, of course, maybe not everybody knows, but 40,000 people live there, so there's a lot of complexity in the situation. And there are some groups and many people that have doubts or many questions about the urbanization planning. So, I mean, we all agree with the participation in theory, but maybe it's very hard to put it in the concrete situation, I mean. So my question is, how can a plan overcome maybe these kind of situations, on how we can solve and proceed with it? Sorry if my English is not so good, I hope it's okay.
Yes, and so in the very short time that for the presentation, we tend, to picture a very rosy situation and participation great, everybody is in agreement, and then we know exactly what we're financing, and everybody is absolutely fine. No, participation is a complex process, and you will see a lot of diverging voices. But the participation is really the mean to make sure that those voices will be heard and that consensus will be built. Without that, you will just have frustration from different groups that can end up, completely blocking the implementation of the project. So yes, it's not an easy path, and you will have, some difficulties, you will have some complaints, but that, on the contrary, justify the participation, because that's the only way you can really overcome that, is by making sure that there is space for all the groups, even with diverging voice, to express themselves. And then we try to get out and to find some type of consensus. So that's the way we see that. It's not just a happy journey that everybody will agree and we applaud at the end. No, it's complicated. It takes time. It takes a lot of structured approach, because we need to also make sure that the dialogue and the exchange of ideas and proposal will end up to something. It has to get somewhere. So you need to accompany, and it's not just a natural and spontaneous process. It needs to be driven as well. So that's what we're trying to do.
Hello? Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, Alex Frediani, a lecturer from the Development Planning Unit and also in the board of Habitat International Coalition. So thank you very much for your presentations. It's great to see slum upgrading at the agenda of those institutions. I just would like to hear your perspectives on 3 different points in terms of how your institutions are approaching them. First, around forced evictions. We know that forced evictions in the increase. We know, for example, 30,000 people has been evicted in Lagos in 2016. 300,000 people under threat of evictions by the lagoon in Lagos. And in Brazil, we've seen fires in São Paulo all over in terms of also generating a series of evictions. What are your institutions talking about forced evictions? One of the key preoccupations of people living in informal settlements, and to integrate them into an urbanization process, I think is a good place to start from. Secondly, what are your views around the unfavorable forms of inclusions? I mean, Amartya Sen talks about unfavorable inclusions in his papers around social exclusion. And in many of the points that you pointed out in terms of experiences of integration, they are actually generating, study shows, a series of unfavorable inclusions that they generate. In terms of the metro cables, we've seen in Brazil, in Rio, communities rejecting metro cables in Brazil because they is perceived to be a waste of public resources. In terms of the executive committees of the slum upgrading programs in Kenya, it bypassed the existing structures of representations, which actually have been criticized. Same studies I've been demonstrating in Salvador, how the Ribeira Azul program funded by the World Bank created the structures that actually undermined local representative structures. So what type of participation and inclusion does that generate, and what are the kind of unfavorable conditions that generates? So I would like to hear your points around that. And finally, do you see any role of informality to help us in achieving the implementation of the new urban agenda or the urban SDG? I mean, because most of the presentations approach informality as the problem we need to solve, but does it have any opportunity? In the 1970s, a lecturer from my department, John Turner, brought up the potentialities of self-help and informality to actually help us to achieve our urban goals. So what do your institutions think about that today?
I can answer, and then my colleagues will continue. So basically, in terms of forced eviction, there is a very clear policy. Whenever a project triggers and if there is any kind of resettlement, the project goes to another level of evaluation, and then they are only acceptable under environmental concerns. Meaning if there is a population that is living in conditions that are harming for their own health. Otherwise, there is no funding for any project that will make resettlements. The second thing, I think it's a function of meaningful participation. One thing is doing participation as due diligence, but meaningful participation never ends. Meaningful participation starts and continues, and it's not depending on funding. It has to be meaningful for those who are engaged there, and that would create an understanding of the needs, and will renew those, above and beyond any external funding. And the third, in terms of the positive side, yes, but I feel it's kind of selfish to think that there is a positive side, because you can argue that that's a source of labor, that's a source of ingenuity, that's a source of the ability to create new connections, even international connections. But the reality is that the presence of those families living there, it's not doing justice to the contribution they are making to the society. So that's why is this concern.
Maybe to follow up, so just as Nora mentioned for the IDB, we also have some very clear policies on safeguard policies that deal in particular, but not only on resettlement. And it's, for us, I don't think there is any reason to justify a forced eviction, and in any case, we would need to get some type of consent from all the impacted, affected people. And there will be different type of compensation. That can be monetary compensation, that can be, some other type of houses. But at some point, if we want to move ahead with the project, we need to make sure that there will be some consent from all the different affected people by the project. Otherwise, it's a no-go for us to get any involvement in the process and in the project. Yes, I think you covered the one on the fact that we need meaningful participation and make sure that it's a process and it's not just an end in itself. On informality, I remember hearing from the chief economist for the Africa region at the bank once a few years ago, informal is normal. And we were talking about jobs, about work. And that's true that if you deny the informal work in Africa, you just dismiss maybe 80% of the workforce. So informal is normal, but it's not desirable. So the idea is we need to find a way to drive through formality. And this is what Nora said, is that informality, when it comes to settlements, it doesn't provide all these people, the equal access to basic services, to housing, to education, to recreation, that the others can access. So it's a question of justice to make sure that there will be a path toward formality, so that then you can have a more equal opportunity to really be part of the society. Then recognizing the difficulty of the path, but maybe we still need to keep the goal and make sure that we'll get there at some point.
Thank you so much for a very insightful presentation to all the speakers. I have a very, very short question, and it's related to, this is a very complex issue, multidimensional, and you need to tackle it from different angles, what you are doing, you're looking at the present, looking into the future. What I would like to know is how much each of these institutions are investing on the human development, the person, in relationship to, for example, infrastructure, and what is the criteria, and if something could be done differently.
It's a very good question. We are really new in this field of urban settlement intervention in CAF. I'm talking about CAF. So we are learning from the vast experience from the World Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank. But I mean, we are trying to identify the best intervention in informal settlement, and we are adopting, I'd say, not a paternalistic point of view. I think we need to unlock the constraints that are in the informal settlement, and as I said previously, I think that providing the adequate skills and to foster the inclusion of women in the labor market are really important thing in order to
improve the possibility of better income in those families. So I agree that investment in human capital is one of the key points.
Next question. I think there was somebody else. Yeah.
Okay. I have to apologize. My English is bad enough as to speak in Spanish. Okay.
You can speak
Okay.
in Spanish and have translation
Perfecto.
if you prefer.
Mejor. Muchas dudas tenemos. Yo participo de una organización de la sociedad civil que acompaña los procesos de urbanización en villas, y en este momento Buenos Aires es casi un laboratorio de procesos de urbanización en 4 villas de la ciudad de Buenos Aires, bien complejo, lleno de desafíos. Es un proceso inédito para Buenos Aires, pero que es muy importante la experiencia que las organizaciones vienen desarrollando en diferentes ciudades de América Latina, y también es asombroso el gran consenso que hay entre lo que plantean las organizaciones, las expectativas de la población y lo que planteamos desde la sociedad civil y la academia también, y la brecha que hay con los gobiernos. La comprensión de la necesidad de la participación, no solo del derecho para hacer viables los procesos, es muy resistida por los gobiernos locales, por lo menos por el gobierno de la ciudad, y es dificultoso avanzar. Por ejemplo, las viviendas nuevas que se están haciendo en Villa 31 no involucraron la participación de los pobladores en su diseño, que es algo que hace más fácil, no más difícil, su traslado. Los procesos que actualmente se están manifestando en el barrio que planteaba recién la colega dan cuenta de esto. Una de las preguntas, de las dos que les quiero hacer, tiene que ver con esto, con cómo resulta el vínculo con los gobiernos al momento de desarrollar estas políticas, cuánto pueden avanzar en la implementación de los aprendizajes que tienen los bancos en la implementación de políticas previas, y qué resistencias, digamos, se encuentran de parte de los gobiernos a la hora de aplicarlo. Y la segunda, que también tiene que ver con el tipo de políticas que se están desarrollando acá y que tiene que ver con la primera pregunta, que se hacía respecto a qué villas o qué asentamientos se eligen al momento de urbanizar. Aquí en Buenos Aires se eligieron 3 asentamientos con muy buena localización: Villa 31, Rodrigo Bueno, que está muy cerquita de aquí, entre Puerto Madero y lo que probablemente sea un megaproyecto a futuro, y Playón Chacarita, que estaba localizado en el centro geográfico de la ciudad de Buenos Aires, además de Villa 20, en la zona sur, que está en pleno redesarrollo, ¿no? Y lo que vemos es que hay un gran peligro de que los procesos de urbanización incorporen las villas a la ciudad formal, y que ello también implica que las incorporen al mercado formal, que fue la que generó la existencia de las villas por la dificultad de su población de acceder a la vivienda en el resto de la ciudad, y que esto implique un proceso de desplazamiento por efectos de mercado, ¿no? Un gentrification a escala de sectores populares. Estamos pensando desde la sociedad civil, desde la academia, diferentes propuestas para revertir este riesgo, que sea factible y para la población, que obviamente quiere ser propietaria de la vivienda, porque es la forma que acá conocemos como seguridad dominial, como la única forma de seguridad en la tenencia que existe conocida es esa. Y bueno, el desafío es encontrar algo viable y al mismo tiempo efectivo para anticiparnos a este riesgo. Si tienen experiencia al respecto en otras ciudades de América Latina, en Brasil ha habido procesos de desplazamiento posterior a la intervención del favela barrio, y en estas villas que tan estratégicamente están situadas, entiendo que es uno de los riesgos más grandes, ¿no? Perdón por la extensión.
Sobre el tema que no, I will make it in English. Perdón. No, I think you're absolutely right, and those big transformation in Villas and Buenos Aires, and this big, process of transforming of an area requires that all the different stakeholders be really involved and be really part of the discussion. We do have direct direct contact with our clients, so we talk to our clients. But what we try to do, and we have different instruments to do that, is to make sure that our client, because we don't want to substitute to the client, we don't want to undermine the client, but that the client follows processes that ensures full engagement and participation of the different stakeholders. So that's what we're trying to do. Sometimes it's not that clear because different stakeholders would want to get directly to the bank and to get the solution from the bank, but we are not the eventual deciders on that. But what we do is that we are working from, behind and make sure that our client will respond to those requests and will create this dialogue and will make sure that it gets to, something that generate some types of consensus. So that's the way we work. We have instruments, we have safeguards policies that allows us to go that way. Those are part of the agreement that we signed, the loan agreement that we signed with the client, and our supervision duties to make sure that those steps will be followed in a proper way. But we don't want to intervene ourselves, because that's not our role. We are just financiers, but we want to make sure that the things that we are financing, the projects we are financing, we respect all these different dimensions. So I think that's the first one. And the second one, I think you're absolutely right, and that's true, that it could become a risk. And again, the easy solution that you mentioned is to secure the right of property, and we're working on that, and this is a path. But we need to have this kind of sounding board from the NGOs, and for them to reveal the potential risk, and then we work on that, and we make sure that we mitigate those risks.
Regarding that last point about the right, I think that there are some interesting lessons from Africa on that aspect that I think are worth mentioning here. One is a study on Nairobi in Kenya, and the word of caution there is the difference between renters and owners in informal settlements. And that's something that needs to be taken into account, because when we are talking about gentrification, basically, you're giving a bonus to the one who becomes an owner, and you're harming the one who's the renter. And likely, the most vulnerable of the families there are the ones renting, and likely they will be going to rent in another informal settlement that is in worse conditions. And that's something to be very watchful now in Buenos Aires. Then another interesting case coming from Africa is in South Africa, in Soweto, and they were trying to move away from the traditional understanding of titles and tenures, and basically thinking about collective property. And Brazil has been trying to do that, but I think that the Soweto case is more advanced, and basically trying to create collective property that includes also public space. And that has been done in terms of the form of that space as a collective process in which people say, okay, I will give this little part from what I perceive as my territory for making this plaza and for making this street, so the space works. And then, they all see that benefits the whole, because they have a plaza, they have a street, but it's a very long, laborious process, but it's essential.
I think our time is up, so we'll close it here. I thank you, all three of you, for your presentations and your participation. I'll take advantage to make one announcement that there will be regional network meetings for South Asia, North America, and I need to check, I suggest you check the app for those, for the third regional network that's going to be having a meeting tomorrow at 1. So it's during the lunch hour. The idea is to have a quick lunch hour and then to go to those regional network meetings. I think it's from 1 to 1:45, but they asked me to mention it, but you should check out the app.